Hey, welcome to Agnes Thompson's channel. My name's Dorothy, and I'm going to share my story with you.
My hands, gnarled by years of tireless labor, etched with the stubborn lines of arthritis and speckled with the delicate lace of age spots, still remembered the rhythm. Each loop, each knot, meticulously formed with my old, faded crochet hook, its carved wooden handle smooth from countless hours in my grandmother's hand, wasn't merely a mechanical action. For me, it was a song, one my mother hummed to me, cradling me on her lap when I was just a wisp of a child, and one her mother had sung to her, and so on, through the centuries, across the dusty prairies and harsh Montana winters, through generations of women who understood the intrinsic value of every scrap of fabric, every single stitch. To me, Dorothy, a 78-year-old resident of the quiet, almost forgotten town of Havre, nestled in northern Montana at the foothills of the Beer Paw Mountains, these rugs were more than just old rags. They were living, breathing history. My history, my very essence, a tangible thread binding me to those who came before, to the land that nurtured me, and to the principles that had shaped my soul. The morning of April 12, 2025, dawned like thousands before it. The sun, still low and casting a golden hue, poured into the humble yet cozy living room of my small house, filtering through the lace curtains I had crocheted myself for my first kitchen back in the 1970s. The air was perfumed with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the faint, delicate scent of dried lavender, which I had gathered from the fields around Havre the previous summer. On my old wooden table, an heirloom passed down from my parents, lay a neatly folded copy of the Havre Daily News, the only local paper still published on paper, its articles large enough for me to read without my bifocals. My breakfast consisted of traditional oatmeal, prepared with water, topped with a handful of dried berries I'd picked and preserved myself last summer, and a strong, black coffee brewed in an old aluminum percolator. I had always valued simplicity and self-reliance, lessons ingrained in me by farm life, where every resource was precious and by decades spent practicing frugality and making wise use of what you had. My husband, Thomas, had passed away 10 years ago from a sudden heart attack, leaving me this house, built by his grandfather, and a mountain of memories that still made my heart ache, yet also filled it with warmth. Financially, 2025 was, for me, as for many elderly Americans, a time of constant struggle. My pension, honestly earned over 40 years as a high school English teacher, barely scraped by the Montana cost of living. My account at the local First National Bank of Havre held just under $7,000, a sum that, in 2025, could barely cover the annual premiums for Medicare Part B, which only covered a fraction of my medical expenses, let alone the skyrocketing costs of prescription medications. Each bottle, whether for blood pressure or arthritis, seemed to cost as much as a small monthly pension. The astronomical property taxes, which climbed higher every year, threatened to force me to sell this house, my anchor, my fortress. My part-time job at Prairie Relics, the local antique shop, where I helped sort through old lace, vintage buttons, and fabrics, brought in a paltry $20 a day, 3 days a week. But it offered a chance to tighten my financial belt slightly, to feel useful, and most importantly, to be surrounded by things that held stories of their own. My greatest passion, my solace, my unspoken prayer, was crocheting rugs from fabric scraps. Not just any rugs, but true works of art, dense, vibrant, with intricate, almost mesmerizing patterns that, I believed, held the echoes of every conversation, every smile, every tear experienced within these walls. They absorbed the laughter of children, the rustle of old newspapers, the cozy warmth of winter evenings by the fireplace. I used old, out-of-style jeans, once fancy dresses my mother had saved for special occasions, even old but sturdy bedsheets that were no longer fit for sleeping, but could find new life in my hands. In a world obsessed with disposability, instant gratification, consumerism, and shiny new gadgets, I saw beauty in durability, in repurposing, in creating something new from what others would cast aside. This wasn't just about a craft, it was a philosophy. Nothing goes to waste, Dorothy, my grandmother often told me, sitting by the hearth unraveling old sweaters for new yarn, her wise eyes gazing at me with such kindness. Everything has its purpose, if you are willing to see it. I had eagerly anticipated today. My granddaughter, Emma, and my grandson, Jacob, were coming for lunch. Emma, 28, worked in Silicon Valley in digital marketing for some trendy tech company whose name I could never quite recall. She spoke of big data and cloud solutions, and it sounded like something out of a science fiction novel to me. Jacob, 26, was an aspiring blogger, perpetually lost in virtual reality, dreaming of a career in the metaverse. He'd talk about his streams and virtual avatars, and I'd feel like a fossilized relic listening to him. I loved them dearly. They were my only grandchildren. Yet an immense, unbridgeable chasm lay between us, a gap of generations, technology, and values that seemed to widen with each passing year. I desperately wanted to bridge it. I wanted to reach them, to show them that old didn't always mean useless. I had woken long before dawn to prepare all their favorites. I baked my signature apple pie, a recipe passed down through generations. With cinnamon I ground myself from whole sticks in an old coffee grinder, and apples from my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson's, orchard, who, like me, preferred natural ingredients. I made their beloved quinoa salad and roasted chicken, marinated in herbs from my own garden. I set the table with my best tablecloth, a wedding gift from decades ago. But most importantly, I finished that rug. It was meant for Emma. The rug was done in soft pastel shades, mint green, pale pink, sky blue, with an intricate geometric pattern that I thought would perfectly complement her modern, minimalist apartment, about which she spoke so often. It was made from old but clean bed sheets Emma had given me when she moved out of college, sheets she'd wanted to discard. I even added a few strips from her baby blanket, the one I had crocheted for her when she was an infant, featuring tiny sheep. This wasn't just a rug, it was a message. A message of love, continuity, roots, an invisible bond that I hoped still existed between us. At 1 o'clock, their van, a massive, gleaming, electronics-laden vehicle with tinted windows, resembling a spaceship, slowly and almost silently pulled up beside my trusty, worn Ford F-150, which had served me faithfully for the past 30 years. "Grandma," Emma cried, stepping out of the van, her hair a vibrant sugar pink, dressed in a trendy jumpsuit made of some synthetic, shimmering material. Jacob, already sporting his bulky VR headset, stumbled on the porch step, to which Emma rolled her eyes with an expression of habitual annoyance. They were my children, but their world felt utterly alien to me. Lunch proceeded as usual. Polite, yet detached, as if we were communicating through an invisible glass wall. Emma constantly checked her smartphone, its screen glowing right in front of her face, responding to urgent messages that, she claimed, concerned global financial markets or innovative startups. Jacob, even with his headset off, seemed to still be drifting somewhere in his virtual worlds. His eyes were unfocused, and he fidgeted constantly in his chair, as if eager to return to his digital adventure. They spoke of cryptocurrencies, NFTs, virtual assets, decentralized finance, words that were as foreign and incomprehensible to me as ancient runes or the language of forgotten tribes. I tried to interject, to ask about their work, their lives, how they were feeling, but their responses were clipped, and their gazes consistently drifted to their screens or simply slid past me, never quite lingering. After we finished the chicken and salad, I decided it was time. "Emma, Jacob, I have something for you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and confident, to mask the tremor that ran through me. I walked to my sewing basket where the carefully folded rug lay. It was folded into a neat square, its pastel colors shimmering in the sunlight filtering through the window. I slowly pulled it out and extended it to Emma. "Emma, this is for you. I made it from your old bed sheets. Do you remember bringing them to me when you moved out for college?" Emma took the rug, her gaze skimming over it, then she cast a quick, almost imperceptible glance at Jacob, as if seeking his support or validation. A fleeting expression crossed her face, perhaps slight embarrassment, perhaps pity, or perhaps just impatience. "Oh, Grandma, it's nice," she said, but her tone was as flat as my bank balance after paying utilities. She didn't even unfold it completely. But where would I put it? I have a studio apartment, very minimalist. And it's just old rags, right? I'm sorry, but it looks like junk. I can't really use it. It doesn't fit my aesthetic, and honestly, it just clutters up the space. My heart clenched so tightly I thought it might burst. Junk. My rugs, woven with love, time, and memory, every stitch imbued with my recollections, were junk. Jacob snickered, returning to his phone, and his voice, amplified by the silence, reached me. "Yeah, Grandma, that's not really in style in New York. Nobody wants clutter. We buy everything digital now, obviously. Everything has to be clean, minimalist, and, most importantly, non-physical. That's just old junk." It was a blow. A sharper blow than any physical pain I had ever felt from arthritis or from falling on slippery steps. This wasn't just a rejection of my gift, it was a rejection of my worth, my legacy, everything I had tried to pass on to them. I felt as if my hands, instead of creating something beautiful, were merely collecting dust and refuse, fit only for the dump. My eyes stung, but with a supreme effort of will, I held back the tears. I nodded, took the rug back, folded it carefully, and returned it to my sewing basket as if it were the most ordinary gesture. My pie, baked with such love and hope, suddenly tasted bitter and flavorless. After they left, their massive, gleaming van left only a cloud of dust on my driveway. I sat on the porch, gazing at the boundless, golden fields of Montana that stretched to the horizon, dissolving into a blue haze. The silence was deafening, and in that silence, the word junk swirled in my mind like a persistent fly I couldn't swat away. But along with the pain, slowly but surely, another feeling grew. A deep, almost instinctive indignation. They didn't see the value. They didn't understand. They were blind. But I would show them. I would show them all that these old rags, this junk, woven by my hands from centuries-old traditions, were more than just remnants of the past. They were something far greater. And if they wouldn't accept my wisdom willingly, perhaps they would listen when that wisdom spoke in a language they understood, a language they called sensation, innovation, or even billions. Emma's and Jacob's words echoed in my ears like shattered glass. Junk. Clutter. These dismissive labels, uttered with such casual indifference, didn't just wound, they ignited a spark within me that had smoldered beneath the ashes of decades. I was not a woman who gave up. My life in Montana had taught me resilience. I had survived droughts that cracked the earth from the heat, snowstorms that cut us off from the world for weeks, the loss of Thomas that felt like the end of everything, and the unending struggle for every cent to keep this house, this land, this memory. I knew what survival meant. And I knew what value was, even if others couldn't see it, even if it was covered with a thick layer of dust. The first few days after my grandchildren's visit, I spent in deep contemplation, sitting in my rocking chair, a gift from my 50th birthday, surrounded by piles of yarn and unfinished projects waiting their turn. My fingers, though aching from arthritis, instinctively sorted through the threads, feeling their texture, their weight, their potential. How could I convey to them, to this new generation living in a world of instant news and virtual illusions, that value wasn't always measured in dollars or digital pixels? How could I show them that traditions and crafts, which they considered obsolete, could be relevant and even powerful? The answer came unexpectedly as I, despairing of finding solace in old photographs, decided to sort through Thomas's papers. Among his dusty financial reports, some dating back to the 90s, and old maps of abandoned mines, he had been a geological engineer who spent his life searching for deposits of rare minerals in the Montana mountains. I stumbled upon a yellowed article from an old Popular Mechanics magazine from the 1980s. It featured an antenna, and the headline read, "Textile Antennas, the Future of Communications?" It spoke of how certain rare natural fibers, woven into fabrics, could create unique electromagnetic properties, capable of either conducting or shielding waves. My mind, though slightly clouded by years and fatigue, seized upon this. Electromagnetic properties. In 2025, everyone was obsessed with technology. Could my old rags have something to do with this? I decided it was time to learn something new. My old Dell computer, a Christmas gift from Thomas about 10 years ago, was like a dark forest to me, where every click could lead to disaster. I knew how to check email and the weather forecast, but little else. Yet, I was determined. My motto had always been, if you can't do it yourself, who will? I began to search for information. My internet, provided by the local monopolist, Montana Broadband, was slow, cutting out several times a day, and my eyesight wasn't perfect, but I was patient. I spent hours trying to understand complex scientific articles, terminology, and graphs. I studied articles on smart textiles, conductive fibers, electromagnetic shielding, Faraday cages, and even earthing therapy, a concept that, as it turned out, was gaining popularity among those seeking natural ways to restore energy. The more I read, the more I realized that the world I lived in was far more complex and interesting than I had imagined. And my grandchildren, absorbed in virtual reality, had no idea that the physical world they considered old might hold the answers to their newest, most pressing problems. I learned about what was called electromagnetic smog, an invisible pollution emanating from all these smartphones, computers, Wi-Fi routers, cell towers, satellite dishes that surrounded us everywhere in 2025. Some scientists suggested it could affect sleep, concentration, the nervous system, and overall well-being. And people living in big cities, in concrete jungles like Emma and Jacob, were especially susceptible to this, surrounded by thousands of devices operating simultaneously. I remembered Emma constantly complaining about chronic insomnia, migraines, and an inability to focus, and Jacob about rapid eye fatigue, irritability, and a constant feeling of brain fog. My rugs, woven from natural fibers, had always intuitively created a feeling of coziness, warmth, and security. But what if it was more than just a feeling? What if some of the old fabrics I used, for example, linen grain sacks Thomas had brought from old warehouses back in the 80s, or cotton from vintage quilts stored in the attic trunk, possessed special properties? I began to experiment. I couldn't go to some high-tech lab in Bozeman, but I could read, and I could use my home as my own laboratory. I learned about the density of thread weaving, about natural dyes that could alter electrical conductivity. I even tried to find old fabric samples on eBay mentioned in ancient textile research, which was quite an adventure in the world of online commerce. It felt like an investigation, a treasure hunt, and each new discovery gave me a surge of energy, despite my weary bones. My attempts were not without obstacles. I accidentally deleted important files from my computer several times, my eyes grew tired from the bright screen, and my bank account didn't allow me to buy expensive materials or pay for any online entrepreneurship courses that constantly popped up in ads. One day, trying to figure out the Wi-Fi router settings, I accidentally disconnected the internet for an entire day, causing panic for my neighbor, Mr. O'Malley, who depended on his online poker game. He came over, red with anger, and I had to humbly ask him to help me. It was awkward, but I didn't give up. I returned to Thomas's papers again, this time with a new, more focused gaze. I discovered an old, dusty book on minerals and crystals he'd bought at some yard sale. It described a type of slate found in our area. Slate, it turned out, possessed natural shielding properties against electromagnetic radiation. It was present in tiny, almost invisible particles in the soil and clay. Could I use this? I remembered how Grandma sometimes added dry, ground clay to her yarn for strength and color. What if it wasn't just about the color? What if it was part of an ancient, forgotten wisdom that had been passed down through generations, but whose true meaning had been lost? I began to carefully collect small samples of clay from my backyard, from under the old apple tree, mixing them with water and soaking some of the threads. It was like alchemy, an ancient ritual. My hands, accustomed to rough work, now measured proportions with surprising precision, striving for the right consistency. I didn't know if it would work, but I felt I was heading in the right direction. I needed to create something that not only looked beautiful but did something. Something that would make them not just appreciate, but demand my junk. My only ally, albeit an unwitting one, became Mildred, my neighbor across the road. Mildred was my age, but far more digitally savvy. She effortlessly managed her tablet, was active in several online communities for seniors, and even sold her knitted scarves on Etsy. I asked her to help me set up an account on that platform. She, of course, initially looked skeptically at my old rugs that I brought her in my basket. "Dorothy, who would buy this? It's, well, very specific. And frankly, it looks like something from the 50s, she said, but seeing my determination, she agreed to help. All right, Dorothy, I'll help, but I'm not promising a gold mine. People want new, not old. I didn't go into detail about the magical properties of my new rugs. Let that be my little secret. I took several photos of my new rugs in natural light. They were denser than usual, with a slightly coarser texture, but the colors were deep and rich thanks to the natural pigments from the clay and minerals. I named the collection Dorothy's Earth Weaves. Handmade in Montana. I set the price symbolically $50 for a small rug, $75 for a medium one. I needed money to buy more materials, to pay the electricity bills for my old heater, but I didn't expect a miracle. I just wanted someone, besides myself, to see their value. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I continued to crochet, to read, to experiment. My fingers ached, but my heart was filled with resolve. My supply of yarn from old fabrics grew. I even started asking neighbors to give me their old bed sheets and jeans if they weren't using them. I even found an old piece of fabric from my wedding dress. It was a very dense cotton that, I now suspected, might possess some of the properties I was looking for. I carefully cut it into strips, feeling a part of my past dissolve, but perhaps transform into something new. It was painful, but I understood that sometimes you had to sacrifice the past to build the future. One evening, as I was about to go to bed, having turned off the lights and prepared for another restless night, I heard a distinctive, piercing notification sound from my computer. It was so unexpected that I jumped. I walked over, my heart fluttering like a trapped bird. I had an order. Someone from New York, from the very heart of that huge, bustling city, had bought one of my small rugs. I couldn't believe my eyes. It wasn't Wall Street, but it was a start. I packed the rug with special care, wrapping it in craft paper and tying it with jute twine, attaching a small, handwritten note in my slightly shaky script, "With love from Montana. May it bring you peace," which is so hard to find in the modern world. I felt a surge of strength. Perhaps I hadn't conquered Wall Street yet, but I had taken the first step. My confidence grew each day, as did the number of my rugs. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I was ready for the fight. I was ready to prove that my junk was a treasure. But what I learned or did next turned all expectations upside down. You won't believe how it ended. The order from New York was the spark that ignited the flame. It was followed by another, then another and another. Each time I heard that distinctive, almost musical notification chime of a sale, my heart filled with a quiet yet profound joy. People were buying my rugs, and not just because of their appearance, not merely because they were handmade. Strange yet encouraging comments began to appear in the reviews, which I reread several times, barely believing my eyes. "I feel calmer. My sleep has improved. For the first time in years, I'm sleeping without sleep aids. Strangely, my head seems to ache less. And the constant fatigue has vanished." I knew it wasn't just a coincidence. My earth weaves were working. Soon, a well-known blogger specializing in healthy living and tech detox, with an audience of millions of followers, contacted me. Her name was Ava Gardner, and she lived in New York, in some high-tech apartment on the Upper West Side where, as she described in her videos, even the refrigerator was connected to Wi-Fi. She bought several of my rugs and placed them in her bedroom and home office. Her review was astonishing, almost sensational. She shared how my rugs had helped her cope with chronic insomnia, persistent migraines, and the nervous tension caused, in her words, by constant exposure to electromagnetic radiation from countless gadgets in her apartment. As if I lived inside a microwave. She even conducted a field experiment with her professional EMF meter, which showed a significant reduction in radiation near the rugs. Her post and video went viral with the speed of a wildfire. Overnight, my rugs became a hit. They were dubbed grounding mats, smog shields, natural tranquilizers, and even digital detoxifiers. Orders poured in like rain. I could barely keep up with the crocheting. My hands ached even more, but now it was a pleasant ache from creation. My small room, where I had once slept as a child, transformed into a veritable workshop, piled high with rolls of old fabrics, cut strips, skeins of yarn, and finished products. I opened a separate bank account specifically for my business, which Mildred helped me name Dorothy's Earth Weaves. The sums flowing into it were astounding for a modest retiree from Montana. I hired several women from our town, old acquaintances of mine who also lived on meager pensions, to help me prepare the threads, sort the fabrics, and pack the orders. We worked late, under the aroma of freshly baked apple pie and the soft music from an old radio, discussing the latest news and our own small joys. It was amazing, not just because I was earning money, but because I was creating something meaningful that helped people, and most importantly, I was providing work for other women. The media picked up the story with unprecedented speed. How a 78-year-old grandma from Montana is creating anti-EMF rugs that are conquering New York screamed headlines in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. My junk rugs became a sensation, discussed on national news channels from CNN to Fox News and in major financial publications. Wall Street? It turned out that even there, in the epicenter of digital frenzy, people suffered from electromagnetic smog and sought natural, organic ways to relax and restore their energy. My rugs began appearing in the offices of large investment firms, in the penthouses of high-ranking financiers, in meditation centers in Manhattan, and even in high-end spas. The prices for my products soared. What I had sold for $50 now fetched $500 and collectible pieces thousands. One of my rugs, woven from particularly old, rare linen fabric, sold at a charity auction for $10,000. Emma and Jacob, of course, found out about it. At first, they were in shock, then utterly perplexed. Emma called me, her voice stammering, almost unrecognizable. "Grandma, is this true? Your rugs, they're on TV. My colleagues on Wall Street are all talking about them." I calmly replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the internal triumph. "Yes, dear, those are the very rugs you called junk." A long, resonant silence hung on the line, more eloquent than any words. Jacob, usually so confident, arrogant, and immersed in his virtual dreams, now timidly asked me about marketing strategy and digital assets related to my business. Their attitude shifted from dismissive, it became surprised, then respectful, and finally, desperate. By mid-year, a real crisis erupted in our family, forcing them to turn to me not for advice, but for help, for one last hope. Emma's tech company, into which she had poured all her savings, all her energy, and which promised to revolutionize the metaverse, turned out to be another bubble, inflated on empty promises. The shares crashed overnight, leaving thousands of investors empty-handed. She lost almost everything: her savings, her reputation, her faith in new technologies. Jacob, who had convinced her to invest because it's the future, Grandma, was just as desperate. He, like many others, had invested in some invisible crypto assets that vanished when a major exchange went bankrupt, its founder fleeing and leaving behind only lawsuits. They were on the verge of financial ruin, without savings, burdened by a mortgage and piles of debt. Their modern world, built on the sand of digital illusions, had cracked deeply and irrevocably. Emma and Jacob came to me again, but this time their faces were pale and haggard. Their eyes were full of tears, and their shoulders slumped under the weight of their burdens. They told me everything about their losses, their fear, the hopelessness that had engulfed them. They sat before me, two grown, lost children, and waited. They waited not for judgment, not for reproaches, but for my wisdom. I listened to them intently, nodding. My heart ached with pity, but I knew this was a moment of truth, a moment when they, perhaps for the first time in their lives, were truly ready to listen. Do you remember what I told you about value? About how true wealth isn't always measured in dollars or ephemeral digital pixels? I asked, my voice soft yet firm. They remained silent, their heads bowed. In life, just like in crocheting, it's important to have a strong foundation. To know that what is real is what you can touch, what you can feel, what has tangible value. What you create with your own hands, what you keep in your heart. I told them how I had used old, natural materials, how I had studied the properties of clay, how I had believed in my labor and my intuition, rather than in the ephemeral promises of easy money. I handed them a small, new rug, woven from fresh, vibrant scraps. This won't solve all your problems, I said, but it will remind you of what's important. And perhaps it will help you sleep again, so you can think clearly. Then came the moment for which I had, perhaps unconsciously, undertaken this entire journey. The moment I could reveal a secret Thomas had kept for so long, one I, following my intuition, had refused to discard. There's something else, I began, that I haven't told you, because you wouldn't have believed it. Do you remember how I said I value everything in this house and throw nothing away? That applies not just to fabrics. Do you remember Thomas's old, dusty, useless notes about the abandoned mines in our mountains, the ones you called junk? Emma's and Jacob's eyes widened to an incredible size. Their eyes were red from tears, but sparks of curiosity lit within them. Yes, Grandma, you always keep a bunch of old papers. It's your vice, Jacob said, his voice almost a whisper. In one of those mines, I continued, my voice becoming almost conspiratorial. In its deepest part, Thomas discovered something unique. Not gold, not silver, not uranium, but a rare variety of graphite with exceptionally high conductivity. He didn't know how to use it then, and the notes remained dusty in his old trunk. He didn't even tell me everything because I wouldn't have understood why I needed old graphite. But I never threw away his notebooks, his diagrams, his calculations. It was this very graphite, which I added in small amounts to some of my rugs, mixing it with clay from our yard, that created those unique shielding properties that helped Ava Gardner and thousands of other people so much. And, as it turned out, this graphite not only shields against EMF. A few weeks ago, rummaging through the internet, I read about studies where a similar type of graphite was being used in new batteries for electric vehicles, significantly increasing their lifespan and capacity and also reducing charging time. And the world is now obsessed with electric vehicles and green energy. Emma's and Jacob's eyes widened to an incredible size. Wall Street. Electric vehicles. Batteries. Billions. These were their words, their world, their future. And my junk, my old clutter, turned out to be the key to it. Dorothy, a 78-year-old grandmother from Montana who had spent her life crocheting rugs, had quietly held a secret that could be worth billions. Their faces transformed from despair to astonishment, from astonishment to realization. They spent the next few weeks literally living with me, studying Thomas's notes, verifying my words. They contacted experts, investors, engineers. It turned out that the reserves of this graphite were not just significant, they were colossal. The local mining company, which had previously ignored this abandoned mine, was now ready to offer them the deal of a century, a true gold mine. They not only recovered their financial losses, but also secured their future and became pioneers in a new, eco-friendly energy sector. All thanks to the junk I refused to throw away. My house filled with laughter and heartfelt conversations. Emma and Jacob no longer looked at their phones during lunch. They listened to my stories about Thomas, about Grandma, about farm life, about the value of hard work and patience. They even asked me to teach them how to crochet. Not for business, but for themselves, to feel a connection to something real, to something they could create with their own hands. My rugs became a symbol not just of success and financial prosperity, but also of reunification, the revival of family ties. The culmination wasn't about proving them wrong, but about showing them that the wisdom of the past, traditions that seemed obsolete, could not only save their future but also prevent a catastrophe. And most importantly, They finally understood that the greatest value isn't something that can be bought or sold, not ephemeral digital assets, but what is passed down through generations: love, experience, wisdom, and an indestructible faith in one's roots. My crocheted rugs, which they once called junk, became a bridge between generations, woven with love, patience, and unexpected wisdom. And that was the most precious gift I could give them.